Well, thanks everyone for joining. Excited to have so much interest in this. I do want to say this is not a training presentation. I'm not going to be speaking at you for the next hour and 20 minutes. I don't have a checklist for you on how to be anti-racist. If we had that, I think we would all be checking our lists by now. So this is really an exploration and a conversation. And I know, that can be hard in a virtual environment, and yet at the same time, a virtual environment can provide some anonymity. So I'm hoping through some breakout groups, we can have some candid conversations. So if that is not what you're here for, then, I don't want to waste the next hour and 20 minutes for you, so you can choose to be here or not. So just a little bit about CCASA. The Colorado Coalition Against Sexual Assault is the state sexual assault coalition here in Colorado. We provide a range of services for our members as well as for the broader community. So like many state sexual assault coalitions, we provide training and technical assistance. We provide resources. We engage in systems advocacy, so serving on committees in order to represent the voices and needs of survivors and advocates. And we engage in policy work. So just a little bit about us. A little bit about me. I've been with CCASA for almost 6 years now. The majority of my professional life has been within the anti-sexual violence movement. And I've always been interested in power dynamics. I did a master's research project on individuals, workers' experiences of empowerment in domestic violence and sexual assault organizations, because we often talk about empowerment in terms of who we're serving and not necessarily in terms of how we provide that service and how we engage in our own organizations. So it's always been an interest of mine, and I think that dovetails really well with anti-racism work and thinking about how we are using our power, whether that's positional power or whatever other types of power we may hold. So acknowledging that this is going to be more of a conversation, I wanted to put down some group agreements and also see if you all have anything you would like to add to this list. So as with any time we talk about anti-racism or other difficult subjects, I just would ask that you keep an open mind and think about where you're feeling that discomfort and where that's coming from, and just kind of acknowledge it and sit with it, especially if you identify as a white person, to really have some self-reflection with that. To take accountability. We're all going to make mistakes. We all grew up in a culture and a society in which racism exists, and it's been ingrained into us and our culture. So just knowing that we're going to make mistakes and acknowledging that. Having confidentiality, so especially in the breakout groups, so that people feel like they can openly share with each other and learn from each other. When we come back to the larger group, speak from your own experience and perspective, and allow others to share what they're willing to share. Participation levels. I know people engage differently, and some people listen more and think more and then maybe say something. If you are one of the more vocal people, try to just think about stepping back a little bit and making sure that everybody has an opportunity to share how they're comfortable with. But also I would say, I know for myself as a white person, there's that balance, right, between putting the conversation on people of color, and so needing to step up and engage, but also wanting to be careful about taking up too much space. So figuring out what seems right to you. And thinking about who is not in the room. And so when we're having conversations, you know, again, speak from your own perspective, don't speak from other people's experiences. And also just think about if somebody else was in the room, would you say these same things? And so being careful about and conscientious about what we're saying. Are there any other group agreements that folks would like to add? You can type that in the chat box or unmute yourself. Give you all just a minute to think about that. So I would encourage you when we go into breakout rooms, if there is something else that you think is important and that you want to put forward to your small group, to do that. So do what you need to be comfortable for yourself. And breathe. These are, when we talk about racism and all the stuff that's happening in the world today, it's a lot. And so we, you know, be kind to yourself, pause, take a breath if you are feeling that discomfort, and just take care of yourself however you need to. So we're going to dig right in. I'm going to start off with a video. I'm going to have to switch some things up here because my slide that I have the video on was not playing nice. I have multiple screens here. So, all right.
Thank you.
All right. Sorry. I hope you see my lovely doggy right now. All right, so we're gonna head into our first breakout, and you'll be in groups of 3 or 4. And I'd like you to consider these 2 questions and discuss them. How do you feel about the terms non-racist and anti-racist? And how do you think this might or does impact how you work? So, so Maria's gonna pull up the annotate screen for folks to just write thoughts or comments, things that stood out for you in your group, as well as if folks either want to unmute themselves or type in the chat. You know, what was something, how did you answer the question? How do you feel about the terms non-racist and anti-racist? And how do you think this might or does impact your work? If you want to unmute yourself, type on the screen, type in the chat box.
And again, if you're looking for that annotate feature, if you scroll up to the top of your screen, do the view options, select annotate, click on the text, and then go ahead and type it on in. Let me make sure that we hide names. And I will type in things as they come into the chat box as well.
So having 2 terms helps put it into perspective. We've got non-racist is passive, where anti-racist is active. There are different ways to be anti-racist, but the key is to be active in anti-racist work. Liked the term anti-racist for its emphasis on action. We want to stand up to oppression and racism when we see it. Great. So it sounds like most of you kind of picked up on the fact that it's really about action and what we can and should be doing. And I particularly like that video clip because I think in saying take the C out of racist and replace it with a P, I think for those of us, especially in the anti-sexual violence movement, kind of puts it into perspective for how we talk about folks helping to end rape and who that responsibility should be on, that it shouldn't be on the victims to stop rape from happening, but it should be on the perpetrators, it should be on society. And I think it's the same for racism. It's not something we can put on people of color to fix, but it's on folks who hold power in society and on our societal systems to address. The beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself, and it's the only way forward. I think this is really important because our society kind of has expectations of perfection, and that is actually a white supremacy culture. A part of white supremacy culture is perfectionism. And so oftentimes we feel like we have to be perfect, we can't make mistakes, and especially when we're in leadership positions. In the nonprofit world, as leaders, as executive directors, we're kind of expected to know everything and do everything. And so it can often be hard to be vulnerable and to admit that we don't know everything or we can't do everything, that we need help. And I think that also comes into play with racism, where we feel like we have to be perfect. And if we aren't, then somehow we're bad people. And as I've said, like, we all grew up in this culture. We've been indoctrinated into white supremacy. And so we just have to acknowledge that we're going to make mistakes and that we don't know everything. If we had the answers, then we would have solved the problem by now. Similar to sexual violence and domestic violence. If we knew what the answer was, we wouldn't have these problems anymore. So we're kind of all feeling our way through it. And we don't have a checklist, but also anti-racism starts with us. So I can't give you a plan on how to be anti-racist in your organization because there isn't a plan. Nobody really knows. So we both have to do work within our organizations and within ourselves in order to start somewhere. So one of the things I want to talk about is how do we do that work within ourselves, and how do we hold ourselves accountable, especially for those of us who are in positions of leadership, who have positional power. How do we hold that power and use that power in a way to help break down, in essence, systems of power, right? So it's a little bit oxymoronic. I think, again, nonprofits, gender roles, as women, we want to be nice. We want to be seen as nice. These are difficult conversations to have, and it's hard to reflect and admit that we're not perfect. And so we have to start with self-reflection. So I really like this graphic that I have here. It's something I'm not perfect at. I have my moments and my bad days where I don't engage in self-reflection, at least in the moment, hopefully afterwards. But I think it's important that as we're feeling discomfort, as we're engaging in these hard conversations, I think mindfulness for me has been a really useful tool. So what this is saying is something's going to happen and we have a reaction to that. We can't necessarily control the first reaction to that. We all have a lizard brain that's there to protect us, that goes into fight, flight, or freeze. So we have our initial reaction, What we do next is what's important. What we choose to do with that reaction is what's important. We can go with that reaction if we're feeling defensive, if we're feeling attacked. We can go down that path, or we can pause and say, okay, I'm having this reaction. Where is that coming from? And observe it and choose to go a different route. So this is something that I try to use. Again, like, we all have bad days. I certainly haven't used it all the time, but having that mindfulness is a tool for me that has helped in many situations, not just in anti-racism work. So I want to do breakout groups again. I'd like you all, to think about for yourselves. You don't necessarily have to share this with each other, because this is some internal work for you to think about for yourself. But what do you know about yourself? What are your strengths? What do you do well? And what are your opportunities for growth? What are things you have struggled with in situations that you haven't responded well, where you could do some growing? And think about that for yourself. If you want to share in your group, great, but you don't need to be that vulnerable if you don't want to. So for your breakout groups, though, I'd like you to discuss what strategies or tactics have you learned or work for you. So I've presented you one here, the idea of mindfulness. What are some other things that you have done that you have found useful to you that you can share with others when they come across difficult situations, or they're engaging in anti-racism work and have a moment of discomfort? This is the opportunity, like, we're all on this learning curve and on this path. And so I think you all have a lot to share with each other about things and strategies that you've learned and that work for you. So we're gonna break out again for about the same amount of time to talk about what strategies or tactics have you learned or that work for you. So give us a moment while poor Maria works. Great. So are there things that that you discussed in your group, or that you can share by unmuting yourself or typing in the chat box? Strategies or tactics that you have learned or that work for you in holding yourself accountable. So again, could be something like mindfulness. I know for me, I use what could be called an accountability buddy. So if I'm struggling with something related to racism, as well as just in general with my positional power, I have a couple close friends who I will talk to and talk through situations to bounce ideas off of, to make sure that I'm seeing all the different angles. These are folks that aren't just gonna be yes people and tell me that I'm wonderful. These are folks that I trust are going to challenge me and ask hard questions if I'm not asking those questions of myself. So that's an example of a way that I hold myself accountable. Are there things that other folks do or have found that that are strategies that work for you that you could share with others? In the chat box, we have transparency and humbleness. I walk through things with a friend peer before presenting them to my team. So similar to what I was talking about with accountability buddies. Thinking about how different aspects of our organization and policies, et cetera, might negatively impact or limit how much we are able to help or impact BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. When someone confronts me about my own biases, I listen and I thank them for letting me know. Then I work to really think about where a comment came from and actively work to combat that in the future. Breathe and remain calm. Yeah, so going back to one of my earlier slides is breathe. Like, pause, I think, is the most important piece of mindfulness for me, is just taking a moment to not respond in the moment, to really think about where things are coming from. Affinity groups have been very helpful for my own learning, being able to learn and talk about these issues, not at the expense of colleagues of color. It helps some people to have a framework for intervening, such as, I'm not sure I'm going to say this right, Olow's 6 steps to confronting microaggressions. Be mindful of not explaining away intent rather than acknowledging impact. Yeah, I think for those of us, you know, we may not have intended harm, and so we want to kind of explain that, but understanding that intent and impact are different. And so not trying to kind of squeege out of that. Great ideas. All right. Let's see, a couple more came in. We talked about slow down ourselves, open to others' perspectives, being respectful, understanding backgrounds, mindfulness. Talking ahead of time about how to calmly and effectively intervene when you see inappropriate racist comments, jokes, actions happen. Someone asked what affinity groups are. So those are usually like identity groups. So it could be a white allies group or a straight allies group, as well as, so usually you have groups for targeted identities where they can be safe and discuss, you know, whatever it is they're dealing with. And then you have a group for the dominant identity to hold each other accountable and to have some of those conversations without putting that on the targeted identity group. I investigate where I first learned the stereotypes. I work with others to uncover the ways I've mistreated others based on stereotypes I've learned about them. It's not fun, but it's necessary. Great. Yeah, I mean, I have friends of color, and it can be useful if you have an agreement in this type of relationship where if I have made a mistake, rather than talking to the person that I made the mistake with, I can talk to someone else and get their perspective, especially if they have a similar identity, so that I can maybe better understand the other person's perspective as well, and not put the targeted individual in that place to have to teach me. But you want to have an agreement and have the type of relationship where you feel like you can do that, and that other person can tell you, I'm not in a space to do this right now, or I can't do it in this particular situation. So yeah, there's the piece of holding, so we have to hold ourselves accountable, and how do we do that? And part of the way that we do that is by holding each other accountable. And I think particularly for, again, folks who are in positional leadership positions and have positional power, it's important to have peers and to figure out how we can hold each other accountable, because it's not really fair, because of our positional power, to expect the people who have less positional power than us to hold us accountable, right? Because of those power dynamics. So how do we, especially when we're in management positions or the top tier leadership position, how do we hold each other accountable? So I'm going to play another video here. It does have closed captioning. She's basically reading the poem that it is here on the side. I wanted you to hear it in the words and the voice of the person who wrote the poem. So it's Mickey Scott Bay Jones. I came across this several years ago, and I really love it.
Together, we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that have to fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be. But it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side.
All right, so we're going to do another breakout. And I want you to think about, how do you feel after hearing or reading this poem? And how do you create a brave space together with others, with your peers, within your organization to do anti-racist work? So as she says, we're not going to be perfect. And we have to be brave, and it's not going to be a perfect space, but how do we create a brave space to do anti-racist work? And how do we hold each other accountable, especially when we're in positions of power or influence? So we're gonna, okay. So I think we'll do this similar to the last one. If folks want to write in the chat or unmute yourselves, how do you create a brave space with others, both in your organization as well as maybe amongst your peers? So I know for myself, at the coalition level, one of the things I consider and have talked about is how do I hold other executive directors accountable? If I know or have heard from other staff about struggles that they've had, what is my role as a peer executive director in holding other folks accountable? So what were some things you talked about in your small groups as far as holding each other accountable? You can type in the chat box or unmute yourself. So we've got our organization has started monthly anti-racism conversations led by our CEO and HR generalist that has created a brave space for these conversations to be a regular part of our work. So creating space to have these conversations and maybe recognizing that this is part of our work, is to have these conversations. Someone typed in, that is brave. Other things you've done within your organization or amongst your peers, especially if you are in that leadership position in your organization? Anyone? I think as advocates too, for most of us, part of advocacy is holding others accountable in many, many ways. Advocating on behalf of survivors for systems. So how do we hold systems accountable? So I think we can draw some parallels to the work that we do as advocates on strategies and things we might do to hold ourselves accountable around anti-racism. So we've got in the chat box, taking the step to be the one to say something, even if you're uncomfortable. I think that's great, especially again, if you hold the dominant identity or if you're in a position of power. It might be uncomfortable, but taking that step to just even say something.
I unmuted myself.
Can we just pop in?
Yeah.
Instead of typing? One of the things that I've started to try to do is I pay attention to how my actions and behaviors and the things like an example. I was unsure of whether I got an email to someone or not about a client, and it had to do with legal services. And I'm in a Zoom meeting and I'm talking about it, and I don't think anybody was aware of it necessarily, you know, but I realized that I'm in a leadership position. I'm on the management tier, right? Well, attention diverted to someone else who was a person of color. And it almost like everyone decided that it was probably her fault. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not what I said, right? And so I went to her after the fact. I didn't want to call her, I didn't want to text her, I didn't want to email her. I went to her so I could see her face, and I said, that was not. And I don't think that anybody was really aware of what. So I've been watching how my actions set off a chain of events that could negatively impact BIPOC that's in my workplace. And it's been really interesting to just kind of pay attention to those little things that aren't always quite so obvious. Or did my colleague of color get a chance to speak, or was I talking too much in that meeting, right? And because I'm a talker, obviously, so I've learned to, like, who's not speaking, who's not taking that opportunity, and then trying to encourage that and stepping out of the way. So, you know, it's a lot of little things, and even being uncomfortable with how you've responded to something and owning it in real time and being accountable in front of others so they can see that accountability isn't the most horrible thing in the world, right?
Yeah. Great. Thanks for sharing. If anybody else wants to unmute and share, you're welcome to. So lots more in the chat box. Creating lots of opportunities for learning, discussion, connection. We have a White Caucus Affinity Group, Black, Indigenous, People of Color Caucus, Transformative Justice Work Group, Board Staff Equity Work Group, many places for mistakes, learning, and healing to happen. So yeah, how many opportunities are you having, and how are you organizing in that in various ways so that folks can engage in various ways? So we have more than one identity. So you can have a management group, which may include people of all races. So then do you also have a race affinity group, so that even if you have a manager, they have another space where they can maybe speak more freely about certain things? And so are you providing multiple opportunities? I know for me, you know, something else is just, people have typed in like that humility and vulnerability is like, have you communicated and have your actions reflected that you are approachable? So when you make a mistake, someone feels like they can come to you and have that dialogue and that discussion about it. Other things, give us time to remove the multiple layers that we have built to protect ourselves and dismantle the layers of violence that are expressed in racism, sexism, etc. Being aware that we will make mistakes, being open to all uncomfortable conversations. And I think that's also like you mentioned, it's about having a conversation. I know a lot of times miscommunication can happen over emails and etc. And so having those uncomfortable conversations and putting yourself out there, where it might be easier to just type an email and explain yourself, but you're going to make the connection and you're going to find the commonality through conversation, through relationship building. And that can be tough because you're putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, but that's really where it happens, is through connection and conversation. Making sure our anti-racism work group has the teeth needed to create concrete change. So getting back to the non-racist versus anti-racist and the action steps, that it's not just about being a nice person and not being racist. It's about combating and actively working against racism to change systems. Great. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about as well creating and sustaining anti-racist organizations, since we're talking about organizational leadership. Oftentimes you have a really good individual as a leader and then they leave, and what happens to the organization? So we're not going to do breakout groups because of time, but I am hoping that either through the chat box or through unmuting yourself, that y'all might be willing to engage in talking about these questions. So how are you working to be an anti-racist leader? Are there specific things that you are doing either for yourself, as yourself, or within your organization? What work has your organization done around anti-racism? So we've already seen in the chat box some folks talking about different groups and creating space. Are there other things that you are doing within your organization? Do you have, if you're not actively doing anything, do you have ideas, something that somebody talked about in your breakout group or that's come up today that you could incorporate into your anti-racism work? And then again, thinking about that sustainability. So inevitably, we're all gonna move on to different jobs. Our boards are gonna turn over. We're gonna have different staff. So are there things you're doing to sustain this within your organization as it changes over time so that it doesn't just go away? So do folks have any examples or answers to those questions? I will say I have on a future slide, one thing we have done is there is a document that looks at white supremacy culture in organizations and pulls out some aspects of white supremacy culture. And we have looked at and talked through that document during staff meeting, both to think about how we as individuals maybe uphold some of those values and perpetuate some of those values, as well as the way in which our organization operates. So as I mentioned before, one value of white supremacy culture is perfectionism. I think there's probably quite a few perfectionists out in the world. And so how do I as an individual enact perfectionism for myself and for others? And then what are the expectations in our organization that feed into the idea of perfectionism? Again, with nonprofits, there's this idea that executives, directors have to know everything and be able to do everything and be perfect. So a couple comments in the box. We brought in a consultant to do an initial assessment, and now we are in the process of hiring someone to take us to the next steps as an agency. We're also working on revising mission, vision, values, and agency policies. So bringing in someone from the outside who can help facilitate and assess. Hiring more Black, Indigenous, people of color, and LGBTQ employees. Activism, art, science, and maker education to strengthen leadership skills among underrepresented communities. Adriana, if you want to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit more about that, feel free, but you don't have to. Got attending trainings, scheduled for a consultant training upcoming with staff with hope to grow the work internally. So again, especially as individuals with positional power in leadership positions in our organization, we have the access to the resources and we can create the space to have these kinds of conversations and do this kind of work. Adding diversity, equity, and inclusiveness goals for each staff member individually. I think, wow, that's great. I think, you know, when we do performance reviews and set goals for the year, can you talk about like what is their personal goal, whether that's getting some training or education, or if they are like a program manager, how are they going to incorporate that into their work? That's awesome. Staff taking turns leading a discussion on an article, doing the white supremacy one now, and we plan to incorporate diversity, equity, inclusiveness goals into our next strategic plan. And I see Adriana, you've popped up. Are you willing to share?
Yeah,
Share.
sure. Well, what I always think, like, communities that we have survived violence, in order to improve our lives, in order to heal ourselves, we need to develop skills in order to face the world, right? So I try to do all this. My organization works on arts, science, and culture in order to healing, in order to recover from historical and intergenerational trauma, and also to prevent violence, and also because to empower yourself, because when you develop more skills and you have like you access like fields that usually you have been out of these fields, then you find out that you have the strength to move on to build something better for you, for your family, for your community. So that's why I'm working.
Great, thank you. If anybody else wants to share. We've got created a racial justice statement that our board approved that will be used to guide our future work and policies, added in diversity, equity, inclusiveness into our values and strategic plan. Several staff members sit on different anti-racist, racial justice, community or statewide groups, have several anti-racist books in our office for staff members to read, many trainings. Yeah, we've purchased books for our staff around racism and give those to staff when they first start. I know for me, when I was hired, the organization had an opportunity to do some internal assessment, and it was very much part of my hiring process, the interviewing process. Questions were specifically asked around diversity, equity, inclusiveness. So I knew the expectations when I took my job, that this was part of the job and part of what it was expected of me. So thinking about how you're interviewing, how you're posting job descriptions, and job announcements. I've had staff say that they applied to work with us specifically because they went to our website and saw our values and some of the work that we had done around diversity, equity, inclusiveness. So some books, I can send out like a list of books and resources to folks. There's a lot out there available. And I know in Denver here, with all of the recent stuff that has happened in the world and in the United States specifically, our public library has like a list of anti-racism books that people can check out for free. So I would bet your local library may have something, or I would hope your local library may have something similar. But I will send out a list because there's probably a good 10 to 15 that might be starting points for you. Yes, and libraries also frequently have books on audio file for folks who have time to listen. I don't know how many of us are commuting nowadays with COVID, but or prefer to listen versus read. All right, do a time check here. So I wanted to show you, we did also, in the last, might have been 3 years ago now, where we updated our mission, vision, values. And we break down each of our values. I didn't want to put in a million slides, we have our values on our website, but we made sure that we had a specific value around anti-oppression, which also, when you break it down, gets into anti-racism, as well as social change. So for me, I have values that if my board asks questions or other folks ask questions, I can point back to our organizational values and say, well, this is why this is important and this is how it fits into our work. So I find that useful as a tool, especially when I'm onboarding new board members and having change kind of at that organizational leadership level. It helps me educate them so that we can maintain our organizational culture, as well as when new staff come on. I have links in here to that document that I talked about, the White Supremacy Culture and Organizations document. And that's, yeah, Carmen, that's what I was talking about. There's also the second link here was an article that I recently came across that kind of expands upon that original white supremacy culture in organizations, looking specifically and talking specifically about some of the dynamics in nonprofit organizations. So how I mentioned, you know, we're often under-resourced, underfunded, we don't pay well. Like, how does that all feed into white supremacy and power issues? And so it's interesting in that it really kind of looks at it within the nonprofit sphere. And yes, we'll send out the PowerPoint so you all can have these links. So are there other resources that you all are aware of or use in your own work that you could either share, type in the chat box and share? Adriana mentions a broadcast. I'm organizing an anti-racist panel partnership with the Boulder Public Library, so Boulder here in Colorado. It will be broadcasting on October 12th at 6 p.m. in the YouTube channel. And Julie asked, can we use some of your slides from your PowerPoint today? Yes, you can. So are there other things that folks are doing within your organizations that, you know, it's fine if you're just trying out and you don't know if it works yet or not. I think, you know, we're all trying things out. So can we share with each other what we're doing and learn from each other? So we've got about 3 more minutes, and I just want to provide the opportunity for folks to either unmute yourself and share or type in the chat box. Anything that's come up for you today, ideas you have, questions you have, resources you know about. Anyone? Silence is uncomfortable. All right. Well, we will share the PowerPoints, and if folks have shared any other resources in the chat box, we'll make sure to include those as well. I would say thank you for engaging in this exploration and experiment today. I know technology can, as I said at the beginning, can be both wonderful as well as challenging. And I just encourage you all to be courageous and compassionate, both with yourself and with others. This is hard work, but it's important work, and we really need to do it. And feel free to, you know, reach out to me if you want to talk through something, or if you have questions, or whatever. We're all on this journey together. So thanks, everyone.